Restaurant Unstoppable. Inspire, empower, and transform the industry.
You know, we're still talking about SRV. So what SRV does really well is education.
Yeah.
And not only to the kitchen team, but for the service team, you know. And if a server, a bartender, a manager, a food runner, anybody is comfortable enough to explain the process and to help answer questions to the guests sitting at the table, why is this bowl of pasta this much money, or why are the prices like this, or what is Einkorn wheat, or Bluebeard Durham wheat, what is that? If that food runner, server, bartender, whoever can answer that question and educate the guests and get them excited about it and tell that story, the history, then I think if people know what they're putting in their body and they understand how much effort and thought and good went from getting to that point, then things that you put in your body are almost, for me personally, it's invaluable. Mm-hmm. I'm willing to spend almost anything on something that's good for my body. And
I think that's the direction consumerism is going, because we're starting to realize, if you follow the money, like over the past 10, 15 years, there's been like this huge movement towards people being like getting stupid geeked out over how can I get the best thing. And the best thing we're starting to realize now, this gets into biodiversity and regenerative farming, and we're realizing that if the ecosystem of the earth is healthy, then that produces the best tasting, most healthy food. And we're tracing it back. So I do believe that consumerism is going to transform the industry. And I think the restaurant industry is the hinge between the consumer, because they come and they sit at your table and you do everything you just said. They educate the guests on why this is the best thing for you. And that's why I do believe the restaurant industry is going to transform the world.
Yep, I agree.
It's powerful stuff. But from an operational standpoint, like for people listening to this and they're like, I want to do that, what do you need to know? What did you learn the hard way? Like, what were you excited about when you first got started, and what did you realize after, I think you were there for 4 years, right?
Yeah. So with the flour milling specifically, I think when we first opened, we thought we could sift it by hand, and boy, were we wrong. We tried to make all these, homemade kind of contraptions to help us sift them. Pretty clever ideas, but when Michael and I visited 4 Star Farms in Massachusetts, who has a industrial grain mill, they're growing the wheat, they're milling the wheat. I think they focus mostly on corn or like cornmeal right now. We saw the mill. We bought the same mill, a smaller version of it, but the same industrial mill from North Carolina, stone burr mill. So I think that was a great move. We saw their sifter to remove the bran and get fine flour from it. It was huge, an enormous. It almost doubled the price of the mill. It would double the space that we needed to do it, and we had to make that decision. Okay, wait, it's a restaurant. You got to pay X amount per square foot. You only, almost every restaurant in the world always needs more space. So space is so valuable in a restaurant. We're like, you know what? We can hand sift it. We'll try to hand sift it.
But how much is labor?
Oh my God.
Yeah. And this is thinking like a restaurateur. This is thinking, okay, I spend $10,000 today and I save how much over the next 5 years?
Right.
By like, what's it going to cost me to pay 5 people? How many people would it take? What did that process look like?
So we had one full-time person making pasta, and then a couple people kind of assisting throughout the course of the week. And then our pastry chef, Megan, she was also assisting with the milling process, making all the breads with the flour. So, yeah, there was definitely a few people involved in that.
What would your labor expense be to shift flour, if you had to guess?
To sift it?
Yeah.
Well, when we were doing it by hand, doing it by hand is almost like anybody could do it. So it didn't have to be, the most expensive hourly person or salary position.
But minimum wage, $15 an hour.
Yeah, at least $15 an hour. And then after probably about 6 months or a few months, we were able to come up with a solution that we found a company that developed sieves for, I think it was in like sifting dirt for metal, like precious metals, and it was basically a vibrating sieve that worked, but it was on like 8 hours a day. So who knows what that electric bill was? In hindsight, if we had just had a little bit more space and built that automatic sifter that 4 Star Farms had that we saw when we were conceptualizing it, it would have been much easier.
Yeah, but this type of information right here is gold for somebody who is listening to this and is inspired by this, maybe wants to recreate it someplace else. Like, these are the things you just don't know until you know, right?
Yeah.
So any other things worth bringing to the conversation during the 4 years that you were with SRV before leaving? So I'm trying to pick up where we left off, and I want to make sure we get any evolutionary points for you as a restaurateur during this time.
Yeah, I mean, this was my first, SRV was my first venture as a partner, as a co-owner of a business, let alone a restaurant. And I was fortunate enough to work at some really great restaurants that not only were great chefs, but I also worked for a couple really great chef owners.
Yeah.
So I got to see, and I think that's so important, that if you are a chef specifically and you want to open your own restaurant, you need to work with somebody that's a chef owner so that you can learn from somebody that you are going to be in that position one day. And then you should also work at a restaurant where there's not a chef owner, so you can see the other side. That's maybe there's work at a restaurant that the owners don't even operate the restaurant, because you need to see there's value in each of those businesses. The value that you might see in working in a restaurant that the owners do not operate it, and they're an investment firm, or it's just a hobby or a passion project or whatever it is, they're looking at it most likely from the financial side. And that's their number one, it's kind of driving decision-making process.
And it's this kind of stuff that made me want to start this podcast, because I had parents that opened a restaurant when I was 3, and they were that first version where they were in it every day, right? And lines out the door every weekend, and we struggled to pay the mortgage. And I remember looking at other restaurants where the owners were never there and they're on vacation. I'm like, what's going on here? Like, what are we missing? And that's what was really, driving me to start this podcast, is to learn about these things that you're talking about, the systems and processes and all those things that play into it.